All right, I am back and we're going to be talking about texturizing. So texturizing is a technique often used in modern hair cutting. Texturizing is the process of removing excess bulk without shortening the length. So typically you're going to be selling a client on this and we say, hey, I can remove weight without removing length. So your hair won't be shorter, it'll look a lot, it'll have more movement and it will be thinner, won't be as heavy and weighed down. That's usually how you're going to sell this. You also want to know that with texturizing, it can be used to cut for effect within the hair length, causing wispy or spiky results. So if you're going for a spiky men's cut or a women's look or a fashion look, that's what you're going to use texturizing for as well. Know that the term texturizing should not be confused with hair texture, which is the diameter of the hair strand itself. You know, if you have straight hair and you texturize it, you're not going to make the hair automatically go curly, like, right? I know that always sounds confusing. Texturizing techniques can be used to add or remove volume, to make hair move, to blend one area into another. It can also be used to compensate for different densities that exist in the same head of hair. So blending thinning hair on top to thicker hair in the back. Texturizing can be done with cutting shears, thinning shears, or a razor, and there are many texturizing techniques that can be used. You want to practice all the techniques so that you can use them as specific effects as needed. So become familiar with these in your mannequins before you're using them on clients. Get to know how to blend the techniques. Texturizing with shears. Every student's favorite one before they cut themselves is the point cutting technique. And I don't want to scare anyone, but with point cutting, do it slow at first. A lot of people try to do it and they go boom, 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 boom. Do it slow, get a rhythm to it, and then you gradually increase your speed. Point cutting is the technique performed on the ends of the hair using the tips or points of the shears. This can be done on wet or dry hair. It is very easy to do on dry hair because the hair stands up away from your fingers. Hold the hair 1 to 2 inches from the ends. Turn your wrist so the tips of the scissors are pointed onto the ends. Open and close the scissors by moving your thumb as you work across the section. Always close the scissors, move them away from your fingers to avoid cutting yourself. Move them back towards your fingers as you open them. Basically, you are cutting points in the hair. A more vertical angle of the shears removes less hair. The more diagonal of the shears, the more hair is taken away and the chunkier the effect. Because when you're on a diagonal, remember that you're pulling different lengths away. On a vertical thing, the hair is all in the same direction. Notching is another version of point cutting. Notching is more aggressive and creates a chunkier effect. Notching is done towards the ends. Hold the section about 3 inches from the ends. Place the tips of your shears about 2 inches from the ends. Close your shears as you quickly move them out toward the ends. If you are working on very thick hair, you can repeat the motion every 1/8 an inch on medium to fine hair. Place your notches further apart. This technique can be done on wet or dry hair. Got another phone call. Sorry about that. If you guys have Italian parents and you're dealing with this whole crisis that's going on, that's all I can say is good luck. Comment down below if you are in the same boat. But anyhow, notching is a version of point cutting. I wanted to comment a little on that. So you can notch with different tools. Typically you're gonna be using a notching shear for that, and what a notching shear looks like, it looks very similar to a thinning shear except the teeth are wider apart. That's gonna create visible chunks in the hair. Now this can be used for different methods. If you don't use it right, you can actually make the hair look like it has a giant notch in it. So make sure you're using it in the correct way. I've seen someone actually use it this close to someone's scalp and go like that, and it causes their hair to stick out and find little points. So make sure you're placing this in the correct way. Typically you're doing this in the ends or the mid shaft of the hair. You're not gonna go close to the scalp and do it like you would with a shear or all that. I know for your skateboard in Jersey, you do it in like a diagonal thing. So that is what notching is used for. Notching is typically going to be used for, let's see if I give you a, it's more severe. It's usually for like fashion cuts. Point cutting, you're able to make it look subtle or crazy depending on how you angle it. Notching, it tends to be very, very defined. There is freehand notching, which is a little bit different. So with freehand notching, as opposed to using a notching shear, you're going to use the tips of the shear. You do not want to slide the shears, but simply snip out pieces of the hair at random intervals. This technique is generally used on the interior of the section, rather at the ends. It works well on curly hair where you do not want to add too many layers, but instead want to release the curl and remove some density. I'd say the same thing about notching too. When you're working on the interior of the haircut and the hair is bulging out too much, you can notch on the inside using a notching shear or using a freehand notching, and that causes the hair to level out into a nice texture. With straight hair, be very, very careful if you're ever using this technique, because what you'll see is if you try to notch, you may think it may look cool and get a cool texture. You do the intervals wrong, what happens is the hair looks like a checkerboard at various lengths cut off. Slithering is also known as affiliating, and that is a process of thinning the hair into graduated layers with shears. In this technique, the hair strand is cut by sliding movements of the shears with the blades kept partially open. Slithering reduces volume and creates movement. Slicing is a technique that removes bulk and adds movement through the lengths of the hair. When slicing, twist the section of hair to be cut and never completely close the scissor. Use only the portion of the blades near the pivot. This prevents removing large pieces of the hair. This technique can be performed within a subsection or on a surface of hair with hair cutting or texturizing shears. To slice an elevated subsection, work with either wet or dry hair when slicing on the surface of the haircut. It is best to work on dry hair because you can see exactly how much hair you are taking away. So with slicing and slithering, there's a lot of confusion with that. Slithering is a little bit different. Slithering is used in one section to remove volume, where slicing, you can use it to get really defined texture. With slicing, you're taking the shear like this and you're keeping it, let me get my shear and show you, right here, and you're holding it like that with very firm, hold it very firmly and just pull. The blade has to be very sharp to do this. Slithering is almost like a snake where you're going in there, and the whole purpose of it is to make the hair fall in a better position. Carving is a version of slicing that creates visual separation in the hair. It works best on shorter hair, 1.5 to 3 inches long. This technique is done by placing the still blade onto the hair and resting it on the scalp. Move the shears through the hair gently, opening and partially closing the scissor as you move, thus carving out areas. The more horizontal your section, the more hair you'll remove. The more vertical, the less hair you remove. When carving the ends, you can add texture and separation to the perimeter of the haircut by holding the ends of a small strand of hair between your thumb and index finger and carving on the surface of that strand. Begin carving about 3 inches from the ends towards your fingers. So this is all texturizing techniques, and I know they're confusing at first. Watch videos of them, do your Sen gauge, practice on your Deluxe Deb or Mannequin or Sam 2. Now we're going to talk about texturizing with the razor, and I know this is going to sound a little foreign. A majority of the time you're going to be texturizing with your shears in class and not your razor. So when you're texturizing with the razor, you can use it to remove weight, and that is going to be a specific technique. You place the razor flat to the hair, 2 to 3 inches away from your fingers, and gently stroke the razor. So when you're stroking it, you're going to be going like this. That's going to help make it more wispy, more thin. So you can use this in many areas of the haircut where the effect is desired. You can do freehand slicing with the razor. So this can be used throughout the section or at the ends and should be done on wet hair. When working on the mid-shaft or subsections, comb the hair out from the head and hold it with your fingers close to the ends. With the tip of the razor, slice out pieces of the hair. The more vertical the movements, the less hair you remove. The more horizontal the movement, the more hair you remove. So also know that with that technique, it's important to hear your razor. If you're hearing your razor make a tearing sound, your razor needs to be changed. It's too blunt. So texturizing with thinning shears and razor, you can remove bulk with thinning shears. Thinning shears were originally created for the purpose of thinning the hair and blending. You don't want to use the word thinning with clients too much, because if you say the word thinning shear, that can make them terrified, especially if the client has already thin hair and the whole purpose is to blend. What you want to say is remove bulk or remove weight or blend the hair. And that's when you're going to use thinning shears. Comb the subsections out from the hair, cut it with the thinning shears at least 4 to 5 inches away from the scalp, so you're never going to take the thinning shear and go like really close. You always want to do it farther away, and farther away is better. On longer lengths, you may need to repeat the process again as you move out toward the ends. Coarser textures stay farther away from the scalp, as sometimes the shorter hairs will poke through the haircut. On blunt haircuts, avoid thinning the top of the surface because you may see lines where the hair was cut with the thinning shears. When working on curly hair, it is best to use freehand notching technique rather than thinning shears, because you're able to create a versatility in the hair, and it's not going to be as strictly, harshly defined. You can use this to remove weight from the ends. You can use thinning shears to remove bulk away from the ends. It works well in many hair textures. It can be used on both thin and thick hair, and it helps taper the perimeter of both graduated and blunt haircuts. Scissor over comb technique with thinning shears. This is something that you'll need to practice. I don't use this as much personally. It's useful for blending weight lines on fine textured hair, and it can be used on thick and coarse textured hair that is cut very short, especially at the sides and the nape. This technique will help the hair lie closer to the head. There's some other thinning shears techniques. Just become familiar with them. You can, when you're working with very fine hair, try using thinning shears for carving and point cutting and slicing. This will help you avoid over texturizing and removing too much weight. I do not use this technique personally, but if you try this on a mannequin, you might get a good result. It's something that takes a lot of practice because it will feel uncomfortable at first. Always remember when thinning or texturizing that you can always go back and remove more hair. You can't go back and add hair unless they have money invested in extensions. Freehand slicing with razor. You can use the freehand slicing to produce a softer perimeter or create separation through the shape. In this case, hold the ends of a small piece of hair in your fingertips. Beginning about 3 inches away from your fingers, slice down on one side of the piece toward your fingers. There's the razor over comb technique, where the comb and the razor are used on the surface of the hair. Using the razor on the surface softens weight lines and causes the area to lie closer to the head. This technique is mainly used on shorter haircuts. To perform this technique, use the comb and make gentle strokes. This technique is great for tapering in the nape area and softening weight lines. You'll actually see, if you go to a European trade show, they make something like this, except some of them have another one on both sides, and you can switch it, where you can hold the comb and it just goes right through and slices it off. That's a European razor. The book doesn't mention that, but they do exist, and that's where this is more helpful. So no razor rotation. It's very similar to razor over comb. The difference is with razor rotation, you make small circular motions. They give you some basic haircuts with the texturizing techniques, so make sure you check out those looks. It looks pretty cool. If you have the My Lady supplement, you can probably see it in the supplement book, because if my knowledge is correct, unless they changed it, the old one had haircut before texturization and haircutting after texturization. So they talk about clippers and trimmers. Clippers are electric or battery operated tools that cut the hair by using two moving blades held in place by a metal plate with teeth. The blade action is faster than eye can see. Clippers are mainly used for cutting shorter haircuts and can be used to create a taper. Hair that is cut very short and close to the hairline and gradually gets longer as you move up the head. That's what a taper is. It's like stacking. So you can use the clipper without the guard, which I don't recommend because it can be risky. I always recommend using it with a guard. Without length guards, taper the hair for extremely short lengths and longer lengths, and using clipper over comb technique. This technique is similar to scissor over the comb, except that the clippers move side to side across the comb rather than bottom to top. And with length guards that fit over the clipper, you can use them for texturizing from sizes 1/8 of an inch to an inch long for short layered cuts. Tools for clipper cutting, obviously the clippers. Trimmers, also called edgers, are usually cordless, smaller size clippers. Back in the day before battery powered tools, it actually had a device that I have, and if you hold it like that and push it, it would manually shave the hair or clip the hair. And that's way before we had electricity. So be thankful for what we have now, because that must have been a pain in the butt to work with back in the day. Clean your clippers and trimmers after each use. You got to be sanitary. Add 1 drop of clipper oil to the top of the blade while the clipper is running. Disinfect the detachable blade and the heel after each use as well. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions for care and cleaning. You have length guard attachments that range from 1/8 of an inch to 1 inch. They could be used in different combinations to create different lengths. You can also use hair cutting shears in the cut as well. Thinning shears, also called blending or tapering shears. Combs. When you trim facial hair, have clients keep their eyes closed and remain still and seated until you're finished. There's basic clipper techniques. Clipper over comb allows you to cut the hair very close to the scalp to create a flat top or square shape. Clipper cutting with attachments. Become familiar with that and how to use them. They give you the men's basic clipper cut in the book. We'll talk more about that in the barbering section of cosmetology. You can use the trimmers around the ear to create a clean line around the ears. You can use trimmers the neckline to make the neckline flat. Trimming facial hair, you can use it to trim beards and mustaches. The technique is very similar to clipper over comb. When removing length, use a comb to control the hair and always cut against the comb. Some male clients have long eyebrows or excess hair in the ears. When performing a haircut or trimming facial hair, always check the ear and the eyebrows and ask the client if they'd like them to remove any excess hair that you may find. Take a look at some of your procedures because they give you right and left-handed. This takes up a majority of the chapter. So make sure that you're aware that density of the hair, the thickness of the hair, which is also what density is, will determine the size of the subsection. The thicker and narrower the subsection, the thicker the hair, the narrower the subsection, the thinner the hair, the wider the subsection. In other words, to create narrower subsections, your parting needs to be close together. To create wider subsections, your parting should be farther apart. If there is too much hair in one subsection, it becomes difficult to see your guide. When cutting the bang or fringe area, be sure the hair is either slightly damp or completely dry. So all this same stuff said slightly in different ways. It's important to read these procedures, become familiar with them. At some point in the near future, when I finish the chapter summaries, I'm going to go back and show you guys how to do these cuts. But now I want to focus on getting all the theory done. So I know it's a long chapter, it's very confusing, it's a lot of talk about directions. Don't worry, this is as tough as it gets. It will get a lot easier as we go on. And I have good news for you guys. So there, we are officially halfway through the My Lady book, right? There's 32 chapters, half 32 is 16. We are halfway through the book. So feel accomplished, give yourself a pat on the back for going this far. Take a break, relax, you've earned it. The next chapter we're gonna be talking about is my favorite, one of my favorites, hairstyling, because with hairstyling, this is where it's important to know. Cutting can be very confusing, can stress a lot of people out. When you know hairstyling, you're able to take a haircut and make it into something that you want. You can use hairstyling and create a wide range of styles only using one length of hair. Majority of the magazine stylists, they're not always cutting hair, because if you always cut, you're gonna remove too much weight. It's all about hairstyling, styling hair, adding hair. Things like that are important to learn as well, and we're gonna be covering that in the next few chapters.